I think it's essential in most businesses, frankly, no matter what the product may be or the service may be. But I think the fundamentals of how you go about implementing it, growing it, and managing it are somewhat universal.
Thanks so much for being with us today. I'm your host, Kenn Schmitt, CEO and founder of Turning Point Executive Search and author of The Practical Optimist, an entrepreneur's journey through life's turning points. As a quick reminder, please subscribe on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And please tell your friends all about us. In each episode, we'll explore the intersection of leadership and life. Our guests will be real, candid, pretty funny, and very relatable as we discuss the decisions in their lives that made them who they are today as a leader and as a human being. And what better way to kick off the podcast than to talk to my biggest mentor, both in business and life, my dad, Kenn Schmitt. In today's conversation, he and I will talk about his decision to drop out of college halfway through, leaving behind a full-ride scholarship at Pratt Institute in New York to buy a Carvel ice cream store in Queens at age 20. We'll touch on what it means to have an entrepreneurial mindset, how to persevere through extremely difficult times, both personal and financial, and the importance of building and following your value system. I'm sure you'll enjoy this raw discussion as much as I did. So sit back and enjoy our conversation about the intersection of leadership and life. Dad.
Oh, happy to be with you. Happy to help you launch your program.
Yeah, thank you. It should be a fun conversation for sure. So one of the things that we want to do, with the game plan, the podcast is titled The Practical Optimist. That's really the two words that I use to describe myself. I always describe it as being, I get the practical side from my mom and the optimistic side from my dad. And there's a fair amount of crossover back and forth also. But it's a nice way to kind of encapsulate, what makes me tick as a leader and as a manager as well. So before we get into your background, Dad, let's talk about, kind of what maybe 2 or 3 words you might use to describe yourself.
I guess what I came up with was, more than 2 or 3, but basically in describing how I see myself, the words optimistic, confident, resilient, primarily. And then along with that, I happen to have a great interest and in people. Mm-hmm. So I enjoy conversations, but I also, more importantly, I enjoy listening to people and different stories. That's kind of been life's work is, I guess, a part of my work. And I think why I chose the fields that I've chosen.
That's great. Yeah, very much so. And I think that's where I get my characteristics from as well. It's that optimistic side and that resilient side and the desire to meet people and be a kind of a lifelong learner as well. It's a lot of fun for sure. So tell us a little about your background in the restaurant industry so our audience knows, really kind of what the context is of our conversation.
Well, I first started in the food service business for a general topic between my freshman and sophomore year in college. I started working at an ice cream store back in Queens, New York, near JFK Airport, and for a friend of a neighbor. And the man I went to work for was actually probably my first and most impactful mentor in the introduction to business. It was an ice cream store under the company name was Carvel Ice Cream, and basically a freestanding little building with a walk-up window. And it was a great summer. It was between my freshman and sophomore year. And what I found immediately when I started doing it was just very exciting. It was very dynamic. A lot of customer contact, a lot of working with 6 other employees, basically. And that really was the beginning. And so I went through basically staying in that restaurant from that time until the time I moved to California. But along the way, while I was going to college at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, the School of Architecture, I was on a full scholarship, which in today's terms, I just happened to check back to see what the tuition is today. It's $57,000 a year.
Oh, wow.
At Pratt Institute, and it's a 5-year program. But nonetheless, by the end of my sophomore year, I was getting ready to go back to work in the summertime at the store. And I was looking forward to that and really having second thoughts about what my career choice is going to be. I basically decided that as much as I love design and architecture and did fairly well at school, business really excited me. It just really caught my imagination. And it went on from there. That was the first summer, was the summer of 1964.
Wow.
And by the summer of 1968, I was leasing the business from John Talamini, the owner who I went to work with. And I was implementing my own ideas on how I wanted to grow the business. And by January of 69, A, I got married. B, I bought the restaurant from John. And then I really decided to implement some major changes. And it just became the foundation of why I went into business. To me, being in business, if I had to summarize it and why I think I'm a great fit with it, business is melding an idea with people to bring it to fruition. And basically, you have an idea, a concept, a feeling about something that you think you can market or sell. And then the trick is putting together whatever you need, primarily people, to make it come into being. And that was the most fun, the most challenging, and the most fulfilling part of it. So my career was launched not even halfway through my college education, but definitely took a drastic change. And from then on, I went to, I bought the restaurant, operated it for 2 years. And 2 years later, in 1971, the company I was franchising from, Carvel Ice Cream, decided to go to California. So I hopped on a plane, flew to California in January 71, came home, spoke to my wife, Val, your mom, and we decided we were going to California. So
wow, that's great.
Went to San Diego and launched Carvel Ice Cream in California.
I'm curious, do you think, with the description that you gave before about, the way to bring the ideas to fruition is all about, do you think that your love for business and for people and for learning would have been applicable to another industry outside of restaurants? Do you think it would have been as good of a fit, if you will?
I think, I think it's essential in most businesses, frankly, no matter what the product may be or the service may be. But I think the fundamentals of how you go about implementing it, growing it, and managing it are somewhat universal. So I do think it's applicable to anything. I happened to start out at a small ice cream store. So yeah, it became I think it's a pretty basic fundamental for anybody going into business.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting. Well, and I know it's a much more in-depth conversation, but the fact that you identified that early on, that you were more cut out for and more passionate about the restaurant world and having a restaurant and being involved with, working with folks on the front line with customers, as opposed to, staying with your program at Pratt, right, to become an architect. Identifying that early on in your life at age 20, 21 is pretty impressive. I think a lot of people haven't figured out what they want to do until they're in their 50s in a lot of cases, never mind in their early 20s.
What's interesting about that is when I received word that I was awarded a scholarship, I was 16 years old and a senior in high school. And I know the process is much more complicated today for people applying to college and going through all the rigmarole you go through with hiring consultants,
right?
Just going through the application process and trying to figure out where you're going. But back then, 50 some odd years ago, it was much more basic, and you frequently did it on your own. I know I did it. My parents were behind me, but they really weren't involved in it. But the main thing was you made a decision at 16, as much as I liked drawing, I liked architecture. I had done a few things that were featured in school magazines, like my first drawings, my first house designs. But I made a career choice at 16 because I had a free scholarship, and it seemed like it was a no-brainer.
Sure.
To say that I really knew that was my sole objective in life, I really can't say that. I just was not that strong a direction. The thing is that once a year later, after my first year, and it was a fairly successful freshman year, I had a B+ average and liked the people I was working with, liked the professors, liked the classes. But when I got my first immersion in business, basically just behind the counter at an ice cream store, that just seemed to ignite something that I really felt passionate about. And it was just the whole dynamic of the work experience
Sure.
with people in a business like that. So when I meet young people today, and I drive for Uber now, and it's one of the greatest things I've been doing. I've been doing it for 6 years. But when I talk to young people, or they read my background information on my website when they order the ride service, I just had two graduate students from ASU this week. When they got in the car, they went through my background as we were driving down to the campus, and I frequently get asked, "Do you have any advice for somebody at my point in life for the future?" It makes me feel very old, but it also makes me feel, yeah, I guess I do have some advice. And basically, it's most people starting out have no real idea where they're going to wind up, and you shouldn't worry about it.
Right.
But if you concentrate on basically learning more about yourself, what your capabilities are, what your likes are, and developing the self-confidence that you need above all else to ever succeed in whatever you choose or wherever you wind up.
Right.
That's the greatest effort you can make. It doesn't have to be exactly in whatever you're going to school with.
That's a really good point you bring up. I think a lot of folks that are in their early 20s or just out of school, they're focusing on their first corporate role and the first corporate paycheck. Right. And it's like, I need to get a job. I need to get this income coming in. And they're not thinking a lot about learning about themselves or that self-awareness piece. They're trying to figure out what that next step is going to be. But I agree. I think, the more open you are to trying new things. And nowadays they say that the average person changes jobs every 3 to 3.5 years, right? Which is very different from what it was even when I started out in recruiting 25 years ago. But especially for you starting out in your corporate career, obviously in the late 60s. And nowadays it's just changed dramatically. So not expecting to make one decision or one selection of a career, then stick with it for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. That's really more the outliers these days than the norm. So it's great for you to kind of give that advice to these young people that are trying to figure out, what do I focus on? And, how do I design my ideal, career?
Yeah, I've done a few guest lectures at Cal State San Marcos for a good friend of mine who's a professor there, and I've talked to a fair number of young people over the last few years in particular. And what struck me the most is that what a lot of young people are missing in trying to figure out, if they're in a school environment, exactly what do I have to do? It's so competitive, it's so complex. Where do I go? They really need to spend more time on just thinking about themselves and who they are and what they are.
Right.
As long as you get that down pat and you really are comfortable with yourself and develop a level of self-confidence that says, well, I can tackle pretty much anything that's new. I can learn things as long as I want to, as long as I enjoy it, and as long as it has some meaning for me.
Right. Well, I know you and I have talked about in the past where having an entrepreneurial mindset doesn't mean that you're necessarily a business owner. Right. You can still have that mindset, in a management role, even if you're in a frontline role or you're an employee, no matter what that role is. But just having the ability to think, like you said, longer term, and to really be aware of the things that you're finding that you enjoy or that you don't enjoy in your career, and trying to manage that career and guide it in a way that allows you to do more of the things that you enjoy, and hopefully minimize the things that you don't like so much.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And the other thing with that is, you're going to have failures, you're going to have successes. You're going to work for excellent bosses who mentor you in a number of important ways. You're going to have terrible bosses.
Right.
Absolutely make your day a living hell.
Right.
The fact is, you can learn from both of them. You can grow and learn through both of them. You have to persevere through one. You have to absorb as much as you can from both of them.
Right.
But I mean, as much as I have an entrepreneurial bent in my life, but shortly after we went to California with our big new venture in San Diego, we were out of business.
Yeah.
And basically, I was 26 years old. You were 2 years old.
Right.
And we were out of business. And the question was, do we go back to New York and start all over? Or do we stay in San Diego because we like the lifestyle there? And
right, sure.
Yeah. Family there. And do we strike out for something new? So I went into a corporate environment from being an entrepreneur. But the thing I found out going into a corporate environment that gave me a leg up, even though I didn't know anything about the system, Back of the Box Corporation in San Diego, was being an entrepreneur, being totally on my own and trying to create the business I created, and then make it succeed, even though all the odds were against it in San Diego,
Mm-hmm.
gave me a certain attitude going into a corporate structure that freed me up to try and still do the things that I thought innovatively needed to be tried.
Right.
And that's what I think led to my success at the Jack in the Box Corporation. I mean, I started out as an assistant manager trainee.
Mm-hmm.
8 years, I was a division vice president.
Right.
And I spent 12 years at the corporation. That was, I think, equivalent to my graduate degree program
Exactly.
in school.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I approached the job in a corporate structure as if it was my own.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
And you had a really, I think, a unique mindset. I think a lot of folks that go into any kind of an early stage operational or management role are very tactical and maybe to their own detriment, where it's all about, let's execute on what the plan is going to be, whether it's finance or operations or workflow or what have you. You always seem to have a unique, more marketing, more creative mindset. And maybe that's because, obviously potentially becoming an architect, you had that creativity, that was already
right.
A skill that was well tuned, well defined also in you. But I think, the stories that you've told me, the marketing mindset that you brought to that role really is what differentiated you and allowed you to stand out from the other, regionals or area or vice presidents.
Yeah. And again, it started very early on in just a little ice cream store. It was a franchise operation, and most franchisees are very entrepreneurial, but it's very easy to develop tunnel vision in almost any career, any endeavor.
Yes.
But what I found, whether it was part of my whatever artistic bent I had that directed me to architecture early on, I just decided that as I approached the business, I kept thinking about, well, what would I do if I owned it? What would I do differently? I'm here every day. I know it intimately now after all these many months and years of working for John Talamini.
Right.
And I'd like to try something different. I basically did. As an example, the ice cream store was a simple walk-up store, like a little Forster Freeze or a Dairy Queen, with an exterior window, no interior store. And being in the New York area, basically you close 3 months out of the year. It was in the wintertime. People just weren't going to be outside. So I tried to figure out how could I stay open all year and still sell ice cream, which was a very popular product for that brand in New York City. And it came up with just running sales. And I basically spent $55 with a sign painter with these large paper signs on basically butcher paper, which is a heavy stock paper, and discount signs, which is basically 50% off all the take-home items, whether they're ice cream sandwiches or little things called snowballs, all sorts of things.
Right.
And just starting out in that very small beginning, I was able to generate about $6,000 in sales during the winter months when it was cold and snowing. And in fact, we had a rule that if it was snowing outside, we would close, or if the temperature got below 30 degrees, we would close.
Wow.
As long as it was above 30
and not snowing,
we had that window open, and we would dress for warmth. So
right, exactly.
And the $6,000 coming in over those 3 months kept the business going.
Well, you probably had very little competition. I can't imagine there were many other ice cream stores that were open around Queens during the winter months.
And I can't tell you how many times a customer would be at the window ordering a hot fudge sundae and saying, "Boy, you must think I'm crazy buying a hot fudge sundae out there." And I just smile and say, "No, it's it's a good sundae, and also it's probably the 10th or 12th, 15th person to buy it that day."
Right, exactly. That's amazing.
I found a niche that worked, and it's a product people wanted, and I found a way to make it work for 12 months out of the year instead of just 9 months out of the year.
Right. Well, and I also remember, so fast forwarding to when you were, in a corporate role at Jack in the Box, and I remember you telling me the story about the flagpoles and the landscaping as well. Again, back to that marketing mindset where it wasn't just, how can we cut costs? How can we get, bigger margins from our food service that we're selling at a Jack in the Box? But what else can we do to bring traffic in? Maybe you can share those stories. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's another part. But at that time, I was a division vice president of Jack in the Box. And the region that I was responsible for was the oldest region of the company. It included Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, Western Texas, and Nevada. And we had some of the oldest restaurants in the system. They were tired and had been around since Jack in the Box started in 1951 in San Diego. So I sat down with my staff of 8 people, and which included, by that time, I had a construction manager, a real estate manager, a training manager, financial analyst, personnel manager, and operations manager, and a few others under my staff now. And since I did have an architectural background, I looked at my restaurants as being kind of tired and worn out. But I also felt that, we've been at that point, we've been in the San Diego area for over 30 years. People probably take us for granted. So one of my area managers under me decided he wanted to try a flagpole at a restaurant that he was having trouble building sales with. We started to talk about it, and I said, that's interesting. If you look at, where do you find the biggest flagpoles in any city? It's usually at a car dealership.
Right.
Massive 100-foot high poles with flags that are just waving in the breeze, and you can see them from miles away practically.
Right, sure.
So we tried it. We did a flagpole test in San Diego, and we found remarkably, and because I had an interest in marketing as well, and my marketing manager did some with the financial analyst assistant I had. They put together an analysis program to look at the pre and post flagpole installation against a control market, which was the rest of the San Diego market. And for basically spending about $1,500 to $2,000 per flagpole, we increased sales over $1,000 a week at those restaurants.
A week, so $1,000 a week, right? For a $1,500 total investment.
For a $2,000 investment.
Wow.
So then we started looking at the restaurants, and the company was looking at doing image enhancements, basically upgrading the images of the whole chain. And since we had a lot of the oldest restaurants, I went to my architectural group, and since I was based in San Diego, where corporate headquarters was located, I went to the architectural department and real estate development at corporate headquarters and asked them to come up with something for me for the oldest little restaurants we had, which are these simple little walk-up restaurants that were in great locations as far as being in the San Diego market, but they just would look really worn out.
Kind of tired, yeah.
An image program, and along with that image program, I decided that I really wanted to try doing something dramatic with landscaping. It seemed to me that in the San Diego marketplace, probably the best landscape businesses you saw were banks, financial facilities, where they spent lavish amounts on the not just the building, but the landscaping around it with trees, color, plants. So most restaurants back in the early 80s, which is this time frame, really didn't have much but a couple of shrubs, basically drive-through in the front, one tree.
Pretty desolate, yeah.
Pretty sad-looking, unwatered thing.
Right.
So we came up with a program that we call the landscape design. What we did was we spent about $25,000 per restaurant maximum. But we would do stamped concrete in the parking lot and in the outside patio. Had some large planter pots developed or designed that were about varying sizes, 3 different sizes, where you could put small trees in them, add irrigation, and they were concrete and tile. And we basically covered the front of the restaurant with plants. Everything we planted, we insisted that we don't want to have a little plug put in the dirt and have to wait 2 years for it to bloom. I want everything chock full of color.
Oh, wow.
Grown plants from the outset. And again, we spent maximum of $25,000 if we did concrete work, but we spent between $10,000 and $25,000 total.
Yeah.
We had 25% sales increases.
Wow.
With these kinds of programs in the test market. So we did it in San Diego, then we did a few of the restaurants in Arizona.
That's substantial, 25%. Wow.
Yeah, 25%.
That's a big number.
With these image enhancements. So it obviously worked, and then the company adopted it for the rest of the system.
Yeah.
And then we went ahead and did the same approach. One of the marketing research from corporate identified the biggest thing people worry about as far as stopping at restaurants was the cleanliness of the restrooms. Weighed on their minds as far as, can I go to a place, I like the food, it's clean, and if I have to use the restroom, it's decent.
Wow, it's amazing. Yeah.
And also, in the market research we did after we did the work, the results were clear that people liked it, even though it was an old restaurant.
Sure.
It changed, it increased the traffic flow into the restaurant by the research indicated. And the positive comments we got in the market surveys we did were overwhelming.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, and I mean, in both those stories, and even with the idea at Carvel back in Queens, right? You listened to your gut, right? You listened to, and that's a big part about leadership. You have to, yes, there's analysis and there's numbers and tactics, but a big part of leadership is listening to your gut and what feels right, right?
Right.
But also listening to your team and really involving them and engaging them and asking them for their opinion. I mean, with the flagpole, as you talked about, and then bringing the whole team together to talk about the landscape upgrades as well. It wasn't just you saying do this and blaming somebody if it doesn't work, and then taking all the credit if it did work. It was engaging the full team and enlisting their feedback and different perspectives and different expertise. I'm sure probably different ages of the folks that were on your team as well, and being willing to take that feedback and put it into practice, and not just do so willy-nilly without any kind of number behind it, just hoping it was going to work. That's the practical side of that practical optimist, right? You've got to have some research behind it, but your willingness to be that kind of a leader, that kind of an empowering and engaging leader that let the people that you hired do the job that they were hired to do. And not just you have these unilateral decisions that you laid out.
The first thing I did, I was working in Los Angeles at the time when I was promoted to division vice president down in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was preparing to take on my new position as a vice president, there had been a lot of turmoil in the San Diego region that I was going and a lot of people were apprehensive about somebody new coming in.
Sure.
The region was having a lot of financial difficulty. And as I got ready to take up my position with my staff of 8 that were waiting for me down in San Diego, I sent each of the staff members a memo asking them to prepare a one-page summary of what they do. And I wanted a single-spaced, one-page description of what they do in their department, plus listing for me what they thought was the most important thing that they do and what would they like to try if they could try something new.
Sure.
Then I arranged a meeting with each one of them after I got down to San Diego, and we went over the memo they sent me. And I got the idea from reading Winston Churchill's 6-volume edition of World War II, because in that, when he took over as prime minister, he sent a very similar letter to all his cabinet members wanting to know, what exactly do you do?
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Asking them to tell him in their own words on one page, single-spaced, what they did and what they thought was important.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a pretty radical thing to do in an organization that was pretty well stratified, if you will.
Yeah, sure.
What Mark's Corporation was. It worked beautifully, and I wound up with a team for the next 4 years that were very comfortable with coming up with original ideas,
right,
on the different markets we had, to approach going over to corporate and getting their assistance at various levels. But it kind of broke the ice, if you will, as far as saying, I like to hear from you, and I like to. I don't want to just come down and take over as the person at the top.
And I'm going to actually listen to what you say. Also, it's not just prove to me that you should still be in this job or that we shouldn't eliminate your position completely. But I want to hear your feedback and I want your input, and I expect that from you. But I'm also going to listen to you, and if it makes sense, we'll try it out and put it into practice.
The other part of it also was, since these were all staff people in the regional office. But we were a business that dealt with the public. It was a business that made, at that time, about $1 billion a year in total sales. But it was basically administered by hourly employees, face-to-face with the customers, taking cash and basically the employee was making $2 an hour.
Wow.
So we relied very much on that interaction at the countertop and in the drive-thru with our employees. So I had each of my staff members adopt a different district in the region.
Oh, wow.
So that they developed a rapport with the district manager and his 7 or 8 or 10 stores. And once a month, we had a staff meeting, and they would report back to the rest of the staff what they found spending 2 days during the previous month with their adopted district. Whether it was in Las Vegas, Arizona, Tucson, Albuquerque, or El Paso, as well as they would go out and visit the region, the rest of their district, wherever it was in our region, and then report back to us. And I did it because I wanted them to get, even though they were staff people, I wanted them immersed in the actual important part of the operation, where the hourly employees work, weekends and nights and so on, and actually interact with the customers.
Sure. Yeah.
And it really generated a lot of ideas, comments, and observation across our whole region. And it was a great exercise. They loved it because it really expanded their job.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And they got
and probably showed that you cared a lot more than anybody else had in their previous roles also. So taking that thought and kind of fast forwarding now. So now after you left Jack in the Box Corporate, and now you're a franchisee with your first store in Cardiff, literally right on the beach in Cardiff, California,
right.
which is kind of where I grew up, having worked there since age, 14, before I even had an actual work permit, but it worked out very well. But so fast forwarding to that, and I remember, and I'm not sure how many years you did this, but I remember that your ability to connect with your staff was very apparent there as well. Now, like I said, I was 14, 15 years old, so I remember, observing this time and time again. A lot of your staff was Hispanic, and I know that you and I both, but you especially, had learned enough Spanish to communicate, in the store. You were the first person to step up and, take over the register during a busy lunch rush, or, hit the fryers or whatever it was, or restock something from the freezer. You weren't just this owner watching from up on high on your pedestal while everybody else did the work. You were always willing and able to get in and really engage. And I think that's a big thing about leadership today, is that, with so many algorithms and tactical things and apps and communicating over the, text, over voicemail if you have it, it's easy to be disconnected, from your employee base and to not let them be as engaged. So that always impressed me with your ability to keep that engagement going, no matter how busy things got.
It was interesting. You had asked me to look at or to think of if there were any books or movies that I could think of that contributed to my outlook on business or developed my skills. The one book that I think I learned the most from was Ken Blanchard's The 1 Minute Manager.
Right, sure.
In the early 80s. And there were sections in that book. It's a very small, simple book. But the things that stuck in my mind the most was find people doing things right and tell them.
Right.
Don't just criticize them. Don't just correct them. But find somebody doing something right, not just doing something wrong.
Right.
When I took over that first franchise restaurant in Cardiff, that was really paramount in my mind. I made an effort to really make sure I found something positive to say to everybody at every workstation. Yeah. Even though I wanted to change what they were doing when I bought that restaurant and I didn't like the way it was operating. Yeah. The fact is, it wasn't their fault. It was the way they were trained and introduced. I already learned the value of training through my time at Jack in the Box up to that point as a company employee. Yeah. And that philosophy works at every level, whether you're a vice president, whether you're a shift leader, whether you're just a person working the fryer with just 2 other people under you. The people you have to work with, when you communicate with them in a positive way, frequently, and it has to be genuine, but maybe there are things you can find that are right, that are good, that need to be vocalized. So when it comes time to make a correction, you have some capital in the bank to draw on to say, now, you need to really look at what you're doing here, and it's really the procedure should be this way or that way, or whatever you want to change. Yeah, sure. And it's as complicated as the business world is today. Yeah. It still revolves around people doing things the way you want them done. Right. And there's just no substitute for being able to communicate and be able to get down to that level, have somewhat of a feel for what they do, and then being able to basically communicate with them after they're already comfortable listening to you because they know you've complimented them in the past. Right. Yeah, that credibility already in place. Exactly. That's a big part of it there as well. And I think that's also, and I know it's different today than what it was when you were managing, years ago. But, people come to work at any age, but especially, millennials and Gen Z, even more especially, they want to be able to, they expect to be able to bring their personal humans kind of whole self to work. It's not just I'm a worker bee, I clock in at 9 and I clock out at 5 kind of thing, and you never know much about me except for the one picture I might have on my desk, right? These days, there's a lot of sharing that goes on.
everything from, who I am, what I believe in, my politics, but even in terms of compensation. I mean, there are websites out there now where everybody is sharing their compensation levels, which was not only unheard of, but really kind of heresy, years ago, decades ago, right? So it's changed a lot. But I think, engagement and the reason why we decided to focus on this podcast talking about both leadership and life is because it's really hard to separate those two these days. 40, 50 years ago was a different story, but your personal life outside of work is also part of who you are, and being able to bring that into the workplace, not wear your emotions on your sleeve and overshare. Certainly, I mean, TMI is still TMI, but to be able to, be who you are and be okay with that, and then have your boss acknowledge that. And for bosses and leaders to really say, it's all right if my employees, if I know about my employees' kids, what's happening with their families, what have you, that's part of who they are. And that's what's going to keep them there as a long-term employee as well.
Sure. I mean, one of the things I think I was most proud of in all my work experience was in the Jack in the Box system. I had employees that started with me in 1985, with me until I sold my last restaurants in 2006.
Wow.
And some of them had started out as just out of high school, basically, young people who went on to get on the first rung of management by being a shift, wound up growing up to being managers, getting involved with their families as they grew older, and they married and had families and came to work for us. People who you get involved with along the way that they develop a loyalty and a sense of belonging to an extended family. That's
right.
And in return, they give you tremendous amount of productivity and performance and loyalty and love.
Right, exactly.
It makes the whole work experience just so fulfilling.
Yeah, exactly. Right. No, and that's the thing about it. It's difficult to be a manager, or whether you're running an entire company or a division or a team, whatever. It's difficult, but if you can find a way to make that human connection, also, it makes it worthwhile. And you see somebody excel in their career, and you see them, get a promotion or a raise or whatever it might be, or just you see the light go on when you're talking to them or training them on something. And then they realize, then all of a sudden they get it. It's an amazing feeling as a leader.
Oh, it is. Absolutely. And the thing is that for me, if I'm speaking my personal experience, it fueled the furnace of enthusiasm and wanting to do more by having that kind of response from people who you're responsible for.
Right. Very true.
To see them excel, to see them grow beyond anything they might have imagined. Even people who basically left your organization went on to success in something else.
Right.
And a lot of people who, under me, both when I worked for corporate, who went on to greater success in the company, but even additional success outside of the Jack in the Box company.
Right.
And still stayed in touch with me just to keep me updated on what they were doing and kind of say hi and I'll remember when and what I learned and that. But that's the whole dynamic of the work experience.
I agree. Yeah. So let's fast forward, Dad, to where you are today. Now working for Uber, where you've been, been a driver. They're out of Phoenix area, really kind of all over Arizona for the last 6 years. So tell us about, what it is about being an Uber driver that is engaging, and what that dynamic is like with, with your riders.
Well, I've been driving for 6 years. I've had a little over 24,000 people in my cars, plural, and about 14,000 rides. And it's absolutely been one of the most exciting experiences I could imagine. I had no idea what it was going to be like. When I started out, I thought it would basically be probably an upper middle income clientele. But in fact, it's been people from all walks of life. People from 49 different countries, work experiences from house cleaners to executives to nuclear physicists to a couple who worked as interpreters for the United Nations Convention on Chemical Weapons inspection. Just amazing types of people and personalities. And it doesn't even seem like work. I mean, it's just a lot of fun. And it's I guess the main thing is that the cross-section of so many thousands of people over these years is that the vast majority of people seem to be very satisfied with their life and what they're doing, very excited about it. I don't know if they're looking at an Uber driver as a bartender or somebody automatic, disinterested third party who's got a sympathetic ear. But they talk about everything and anything. And it's just been really fascinating about if you're interested in people, you find the most varied and colorful variety that you come across.
Right.
And most of them, frankly, are a real learning experience for you. You find some different facet of human nature that you may not have been familiar with before or totally unexpected. So in many cases, when people talk about their careers or their professions or the things they're dealing with or just their family issues, it revolves around the similar things you find in terms of leadership or leading any kind of a group of people in business.
Right.
They're evaluating, they're assessing where they are, what they're doing, and sometimes they're looking for advice. Other times they just want you to kind of listen to them work through it. But in each case, it just seems to me that the vast majority of people have an interest in trying to make something better of themselves. They're trying to get something more out of life and out of work. And it's like a hidden resource that's in each one of them that if you can find a way to tap into it as their leader in some fashion, you've got a real opportunity to find some nuggets there that are going to enhance the overall operation of whatever it is you're responsible for and make the whole work experience better for all those who are participating under your leadership.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And I can't imagine I can't think of any other, profession or job out there that gives you such a variety of exposure to so many different kinds of people, like you said, different walks of life, different parts of the world, different backgrounds and ethnicities and everything else, ages. And you get to have a conversation if they're willing to share, if they're willing to be open and be vulnerable. I know many of them are from the stories that you told me. Then you learn along the way, and that goes back to what you said at the very, very beginning of our conversation today, where you're good at business, you're good at leading and managing because you're a good listener. Right? You want to listen, you want to hear people's feedback and stories and ideas, and that gives you a chance to then engage with them, right? And it's a two-way street. You're learning, they're learning, and everybody is better off, overall, for sure.
As a manager, as a leader, you can always manage out of fear. You do something because I tell you to do it.
Right.
I'm the boss. You have to do what I say. It's a tried and true method of managing, but it's the least successful way to manage.
Right.
People didn't have to even think about the fact that you could basically fire them. You control the purse strings.
Right.
But the fact is, if you get them to enjoy working with you, after all, even in the smallest restaurant, people who have jobs today spend probably a third of their life in their job surrounded by the people that they work with.
Right.
And then they spend a third sleeping and a third back with their whole family or the rest of their life. But the point is, you come to a job every day and you're going to spend 7-8 hours in this environment with these people. That's a second family.
Right.
And whoever's in charge of that experience, finding a way to get those people to perform is much easier if you understand them.
Right.
And you listen to them, and you can direct them in the way you want them to go.
Right. Yeah.
But just ordering them to do things, besides being very stressful on you and not a very rewarding experience, just makes the whole environment uncomfortable and very stifling and probably not very productive.
Right. Exactly. Kind of counterproductive if that. Yeah. No, I agree. So, and maybe you've already imparted this a little bit already on the folks that you mentioned that were the ASU students, but what advice or insights would you share now with your many years of experience leading and interacting with people? What advice would you give to either current leaders or aspiring leaders?
Well, it's let's see, how's the best way to put it? I think the most successful leaders have a very good understanding of people.
Yes.
And the only way you understand people is you listen. Even people who you want to wind up terminating,
right?
People you don't see that they fit into your plans or your organization as you want to create it. The fact is, you need to listen. You need to understand before you act. And once you do that, and you really get a good sense of the material you have to work with,
right?
You can then move forward. and finding a way to meld those people and mold those people with plans and the directions you want to go in.
Right, exactly.
So, and I think to do that effectively, you have to really understand yourself. You have to really, you got to like yourself. You got to be happy with yourself. You got to know what your capabilities are.
Right.
Very good at. You have to be aware of what your shortcomings are, where there are some blind spots in your makeup, or some skills maybe you're not as good at. You may not be good at math. You may not be good at writing necessarily, writing memos, or you have a hard time communicating. You can work on that, and you can improve your verbal skills.
Right.
You can do all sorts of things that once you understand yourself, but you really have to be overall the best champion of who you are.
Yes.
No one else is going to do it as well as you do.
Right.
And once you master that, and you have to master it, you can then go on and then project out to however many number of people you want to, whether it's 2 or 3 people who work in your shop, 10 or 15,000 who work in your organization.
Right.
That ability to communicate, to listen, and then to act is just crucial.
Right.
To be effective.
Right, exactly. And like you said before, and it's that self-awareness. It's being willing to be self-aware and to learn about yourself. And like you said, to try to find ways to shore up your shortcomings, but also, more importantly, find ways to leverage and maximize your strengths. And getting into a role, into a position, into a company, into an environment, and an industry that allows you to do that is going to ultimately bring the most fulfilling, career you can possibly imagine. So, no, I agree completely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I mean, this is obviously we could talk for another 3 hours, as we always do when we get together, but it's just such a great, synopsis of your life and the things that you've done and that you've accomplished. And I'm greatly appreciative to have been under your tutelage for so many years and learned so much from you as well. So thank you for sharing some of those insights today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And I mean, it's been a real experience for me as well. And wish you luck on your podcast.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So we look forward to seeing everybody here again, or hearing everybody here again. We'll be here every other week for a different guest to talk about the intersection of leadership in life. And obviously the book, The Practical Optimist, will be coming out in mid-January. So looking forward to getting people's comments and feedback on the book as well. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for listening. We wish you all the best in your own leadership and your own life. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks so much.